We have a special presentation because of the situation in Europe and what has happened as Russia has tipped from an authoritarian state into a fully totalitarian state in which no dissent is now tolerated and everyone must sing from the same book. You can go to prison for using the word war or invasion as opposed to the great book by Tolstoy, Special Military Operation and Peace. Unfortunately, we don't have the outreach in Russia that we wish that we could have. But there is a very exciting new initiative to pierce that bubble of isolation and propaganda instituted by a new joining partner of Atlas Network, Open Minds Institute. And I'd like to introduce, to discuss this initiative, Sofia and Sviatoslav Gnezdovsky, who I must add, very happy to see the unity of Ukraine. They were just married after the war started. So please join us, Sofia and Sviat.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Before we even jump up to the presentation, I do want to say thank you so much to Atlas Network because it's so incredibly inspiring for us to see how many people are here who are so dedicated to freedom, and especially, I guess Natalia mentioned this phrase today that freedom is our religion. So thank you for being here, and thank you specifically Dr. Tom Palmer with all of the help.
Yeah, and basically you have to blame Dr. Tom Palmer for the name of our organization because he just came up with that during one of our dinners in Lviv, and we are really grateful for that. Yes. I think we just have to say a few words why we are here and how we dare talking about fighting propaganda, because I would say like 3 months ago we wouldn't even think we would do something like that. We were just two startup founders working on the mobile application. The application was created to help people use philosophy as a way of life. It's like kind of applied philosophy, where we taught people actually how to take responsibility for their lives, how to apply critical thinking. And then suddenly the full-scale invasion started, and probably at the same day we just thought, well, we can't just continue doing what we are doing. We have to somehow take that experience we have from the startup world and bring it to slightly different domain. And the most obvious domain was informational frontier, fight with propaganda.
Yes. Can we please, thank you. Actually, this very morning, when we had the Cornerstone talks, there was this question raised, or rather the point that we live right now in the reality where the real facts don't make that much of an argument anymore, and there's no answer about how do we deal with that. So fortunately, we are today to actually try to present an answer from different Ukrainian decentralized initiatives. And I guess we'll start with the basics, so Russian propaganda 101. I'm sure a lot of you can name at least a few explanations for the special military operation Russia has provided Russian audiences with. So there was NATO, there were Ukrainian Nazis, there were biological US weapons. I'm sure you can name even more. So first what they did, they've been providing Russian audience with so many of them that eventually people would just get confused, right? And this here is actually a phrase of one of the deep interviews with Russian respondents. And what they said, that it's too hard to know what's true, so they will not even try anymore. And it might seem that there's nothing too scary about that. But the problem is that once a person believes that he or she is not competent enough, that he or she is just a simple person doing his or her work, and the politics, that's just too far away. I'm not too competent to make any judgments. At that very moment, there's this death of agency because people don't believe anymore that they can actually shape the future of their country. So that's the fundamental problem with that. And
then the question is how to fight it, right? And there seems to be kind of obvious answer, I think. Tell an objective truth, right? So you just take those people who who are in this bubble and try to get through that bubble with objective messages what's going on. And we all thought probably that it's the only way to do that. But as it happens to be, as you can see right now, of course, it doesn't really work. Well, what else? What if we try to be more sophisticated and try to define particular audiences within whole Russian population and try to target them with very personalized messages, you know? And it's widely used technique right now in the political landscape. You know, the infamous Cambridge Analytica tried to do that, for example. And we also, well, we thought, well, what if we do that? But this particular tactic didn't really prove helpful at all in Russia as well, because we can't really target audience. The means of targeting are very limited. And second is there is very, very intense moderation once it comes to posting something in social media or just trying to talk to Russians via phone calls or emails. So there is a third one that we came up with in particular, and that's where we're trying to use some subtle metaphor, symbolic language, then add to that personalized message, and then ended up with a relevant call to action, basically. Why it's important to have relevant call to action, not just say, people in Russia, please go out and protest, you know, and show how much you want to be in a free country, and please go to the Red Square, and, I don't know, shout out some anti-Putin slogans, for example. Why it doesn't work? Because, as we can see, there is very little potential for protest in Russia. So we have to offer people something that they can deal with, basically. And in this case, it can be a very slight behavioral change when, for example, instead of reading official news media, they start launching and downloading VPN services on their cell phones and looking for alternative sources of the information, for example, or doing some sabotage, for example, on their factories where they work in railway stations. And that's where it comes, this personalized message with the call to action. Yes, and then the question is, so how do we do that? How a bunch of Ukrainians, yes, with the help of the network and the help of some of the friends from abroad, can tackle with this huge propaganda machine in Russia? And today we would like to present you kind of our framework, workflow, how we do that currently. We sometimes will not go much into the details, so you can ask us after the presentation for more peculiarities, but we'll just try to present you the overall landscape. Yes, and the first part of the whole framework is that we came to academia, mostly Western academia, like the best people who knew how to fight with propaganda, and started consulting with them. What would you suggest? What should be the overall strategy? How to actually get through that bubble? What should be the messages? And by the way, by showing this kind of structure, I'll also try to present how it became a kind of decentralized structure, that there were a lot of parts that came together and created this unity. So we just went to our friends from Western academia. We took some of the best guys we knew from Ukrainian academia as well, like social psychologists, sociologists, political psychologists, and then tried to run a few opinion polls, because we couldn't trust, of course, Russian opinion polls. And then we thought, well, how to run opinion polls in Russia? There is a trouble. So what we had to do, we had to come to Russian academia as well. For that is in opposition to Putin. For example, High School of Economics in Moscow. We had a few friends from there. And then we merged these efforts and created this first group. It was like 14 people, I think. We had just a Telegram chat, you know, we were casually talking. And that became kind of at the beginning of our organization, basically, yeah.
Yes, and so basically what we're trying to do with our partners in academia is tracking all the opinion polls or all of the research there is in terms of Russian audiences and what emotions they feel towards what is actually happening, what their fears are, what their hopes are, and things like that. And then, based on all of that research, we created this kind of a grand strategic communication plan for our Russian social media campaigns. I assume it might be a bit confusing for you, so I suggest you just take a look more at the color coding. It's more or less intuitive. So we have segmented Russian audience into these 4 groups. We, of course, have the soldiers and their families. This one is a bit obvious. Then we have the pro-war segment. So these are people who, in all the polls, answer that yes, they do support the military operation. They usually feel pride and joy regarding it, and they of course support the Putin's regime in its essence. And then we have the abstract pacifists. This is one of the groups that is mostly interesting for us, because these are people who, in the quantitative research, in the quantitative polls, they would answer that yes, they do support the decision to conduct the special military operation in Ukraine. However, if we take a look at the qualitative research and the focus groups and the interviews, their typical answer is that, again, they just don't feel competent enough to make any judgments about it. Basically, what they say is that Putin, because he's our leader, he probably knows what's best for us, and we are just, they use this phrase, small people, we don't know what to do about it. So this is the audience we want to target, because again, when we ask them in general, they are against the war, but they don't know, it's all too hard, it's all too complicated. And there is, of course, this anti-war audience of people who already have the bad attitudes towards what is happening. And then we have two major objectives. So for the ones who are anti-war, we want to break the spiral of silence amongst them. We want to make them feel if there are more war opponents that they actually think, and break discipline overall in general in Russia, like we said, with examples of railway station workers who would sabotage some of the work and they would slow the war machine. I guess we can talk briefly, because we are a bit running out of time, on concrete examples of how it all looks like. So let's take two of these objectives. People believe in incompetence of government, and also people resist the draft.
Yeah, so the next part was to create personalized messages and some kind of media materials. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you remember, it's not just enough to put an objective truth message, so we had to be more creative with these subtle, symbolic messages. And that's why we created not just videos and pictures, but we created also songs, memes, jokes, some allusion to Soviet past, like Soviet movies, with these very subtle cues, and that would probably trigger some kind of questioning within a particular Russian person. Yes. So the next part on our decentralized scheme, when we tried to create that, we actually went out to political campaigners and PSYOP specialists, because they are the ones who are good at tailoring the particular message. And the next part was, okay, they just took a look at the whole research. We have these three main groups of people, three main audiences for these two campaigns. And then the question was, okay, what should really be these narratives? What would be persuasive for these three groups, for example?
Okay, so as we were talking about the soldiers, in our campaigns we usually try to focus on the bad military leadership of their own government. So again, we tried talking about Ukraine at the beginning, but now we see that we should only focus on the internal problems of Russia, because that works best. When we're talking about the active military, so this is the pro-war group, these are the people who are mostly prone to conspiracy theories. So a lot of times we're actually trying to make conspiracies, to make the truth look like a conspiracy. And for example, like we've been doing this conspiracy about how two brotherhood nations are involved in this unnecessary conflict. So there's probably someone who's actually ruling it. Because again, we've talked this morning about this article of Putin's about how Ukrainians and Russians are just one nation. So this is why people are again prone to believing it. And then they start asking these questions. If we are one nation, why are we fighting? And things like that. Again, we don't mind necessarily believe that, but and for the abstract pacifists who have this no clear position, we would usually focus on economic insecurities, because these are people who, even though they feel incompetent to judge, they are always afraid for the future of their kids. So this is one of the arguments for them. Yes.
Yeah, and that we found out through opinion polling, basically, and now we're also doing focus groups for that, so to know whether a particular message actually touches, and we can predict whether there is any emotion from a particular message. Yes, and then the question was, okay, we have these messages, let's create some, media materials, maybe video, maybe write a song about that. And luckily there were hundreds of decentralized Ukrainian initiatives, like people from the creative industries, motion designers, graphic designers, marketing strategists, all all of them at some point, of course, like on the February 24th, they just stopped doing their regular work and they were volunteering for 10, 12, 14 hours per day. And they were self-organizing, and I think that's the power of this network, basically. And we tried to reach out to some of the biggest groups and suggested our agenda, our research and approach, and they were quite happy with that, so they were willing to help. But first, we had to make sure that what we're doing doesn't really contradict the official position of Ukrainian government. They are probably doing something similar on their end. So we went to Ukrainian governmental structures and again showed our research, showed the strategy, and just made sure they approve it, basically, yeah. Sophia, can you maybe
Yes,
go
so
through?
just for this media material examples, we would usually, again, like we said, more these subtle, small messages without actually being too direct. So if we take a look at this one for the group of abstract pacifists, what we're doing here is asking the deficit of products in Russia for the change of government abroad. So it's presented as a question, and we're using the Z symbol here in the word deficit. So again, we're not saying anything too directly, we're just asking questions and things like that. And, oh yeah, now that works. And then afterwards, we do target people with this personalized messages through various channels. I guess you can talk briefly about that.
Yeah, so then there was a missing part, how to distribute all of this. And basically, there were also Ukrainian decentralized media buying or marketing initiatives, like people who knew how to launch ads, and especially within Russian context. And there are various social media that are very popular in Russia, not really popular in Europe or anywhere else, like Kontakte, Mail.ru, like their own local social media networks. And we also started doing some unconventional methods like SMS, emails. There were some databases we could get access to. Yes, and I think here is like a brief description what was the volume of these two particular campaigns, as well as intensivity. I think it's important to mention. So we'll not be just happy to show a few images or videos once in a day for one Russian citizen. We rather try to do that in a multi-channel way. So a particular citizen from St. Petersburg, for example, would receive an SMS message, then an email, then see our ad like 20 times once he's trying to watch a pirate movie on the website instead of using Netflix, and that's kind of really popular in Russia. And with all this intensivity, we could reach probably, we assume, some particular attitudinal change at least. But then the last question was actually, all right, so how do we measure success? How do we know whether it works, whether maybe it's a waste of our efforts?
Yes, so we still, of course, try to have some options for that. One of the things that we are doing, we are parsing the data from about 4,000 local Russian forums and Telegram channels where we look at the sentiment analysis towards a particular topic, whether people talk about it in a positive or negative way. We also, like we said, do our own polls, and here for us it's not too important to make a snapshot of what's happening, we rather look at the dynamics, because of course there's this struggle with opinion polls in authoritarian regimes. Then we look at the impressions and the clicks that our ads have. Of course, if an ad has more clicks, then it's probably more interesting than the other one. And we also try to look at the Yandex, Google, or YouTube trends in terms of what people in Russia are looking for the information. And this is just one of the examples. So we've been talking about running campaigns for draft resistance, and what we were seeing was this at least small shift from the positive to more negative sentiment, how people talk about draft in the local forums. Again, probably not only us, there are far too many initiatives who are running campaigns, so we're not trying to make any causal effects here, but even some small shifts are great for Ukraine. And
yeah, I think basically this framework, we were just ready to make it live because I think of our more tech world experience. Instead of just doing that in more conventional waterfall model where we plan a campaign for a month and then launch it and wait for some big numbers to come over and then analyze the data, we were doing that trials and errors manner. So I think we tried more than 15 campaigns like that. Some of them were really successful, some of them were not successful at all. And now we want to show you a few more examples. So you get an idea about the framework. Now I'll just show you a few more campaigns.
Yeah, so this is just an example of a banner that people see when they come to, again, watching a movie on the pirate websites. And if this is a woman of 40 plus age, she has this slogan here, "Save your son because Putin is not going to care about him." Then, yeah, the reason why the draft topic is actually so important for us is because every soldier that we can persuade not to fight is the soldier that our army will eventually not have to kill.
Yeah, and that was a suggestion from Dr. Tom Palmer. So he beautifully put it in that simple, concise statement. Yeah.
Yes, so we do run a lot of banners in terms of how the consequences of what is happening right now are going to be the most drastic for the kids now in Russia. So there's this like a small teddy bear, yes, and there's a soldier stepping onto it. Then I know we're running a bit out of time, but I do want to stop on this one because breaking the spiral of silence amongst war opponents in Russia is one of the most important campaigns for us because again, I've mentioned this before, there are people who just don't believe that they can change something, and we're trying to think of how we can empower them and to make them, use their freedom essentially, because in its essence, governments can't take that away, right? And this is why we focus on some small, low-risk forms of protest for them, because of course they quite often are not afraid to are not ready to actually go out and protest. So on this example, we see write no to war on the money, and people will exchange money, and then more people will see that there are people who are against war. Or for example, here we're encouraging them to cross Z while they see it, and we essentially want to make it a symbol against the war. So there's the Z symbol, and when you cross it, it looks something like an hourglass. And we call it time for changement with that hourglass. So again, we're trying to play with the symbols there a lot.
But there were also failed campaigns, and we would love to talk about them as well. For example, this one, initially we thought that making also this symbolic allusion to classical Russian literature and touching that kind of fundamental Russian heritage would help us, but it turned out that people were not really ready to interact with something like that. Maybe for some of them it was a little bit more complicated. Maybe it was not clear what we were trying to say, but this campaign failed, for example, and that's what we could measure, at least.
This here is what Dr. Tom Palmer said, the Special Operation and Peace of Tolstoy book. Yes, I guess we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So the fundamental question is here, so what? Because a lot of Ukrainians are a bit skeptical these days about running any campaigns in Russia because they don't believe it can change anything. But our answer to what we are doing on a daily basis is that every Russian who disobeys those civil orders, whether it's a soldier or if it's a student, it's again a railway worker or any other worker that sabotages some small part of the work, and it slows down the war machine. It helps us in our efforts. So
yeah, and I think Mr. Leszek Balcerowicz just recently beautifully put it that in order to succeed, you can't just protect free market, you have to fight with state. And I would paraphrase it, in order to succeed with the fight with the Russian propaganda, you can't just protect free speech, you have to fight with the propaganda machine, and sometimes even use its own methods. And that's what we try to do, actually, to turn it over for our own advantage to some extent.
yes, I guess that will be it for us. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Dr. Tom Palmer.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'd like to call our panelists now to discuss the future of Ukraine and keeping Ukraine free and independent. So if we can come up and join me here, please. And I'll go sit at the end. So, with me here on the panel, we have representatives of our various partners. We have a pretty extensive think tank partner in Ukraine. I remember being back in 2009 trying to get things going, and it was very difficult. The liberty movement was quite fragmented. Turns out there's nothing like being invaded to focus your attention. And so 2014, really, the movement began to take off and organizations began to work together, to cooperate, and really to coalesce. So we have here Alina Polyakova from Ekonomichna Pravda in Ukraine, Maria Repko from the Center for Economic Strategy, Natalia Melnik from the Bendukidze Free Market Center, and Oksana Kuziakov from the Institute for Policy Research. So let me just start with a question that we hear now, particularly from international organizations: rebuild Ukraine, that we need to rebuild Ukraine. Is that the right way to think about this problem or question?
Well, when I hear the term, and we've discussed this extensively with a lot of people present here, to me it sounds like we are going to go back to the condition in which Ukraine was before the invasion, which was far from being perfect, and certainly it's not something that we are interested in going back to. We need to move forward. So here, obviously, we're talking about long-term planning, right? This is the future that we want for Ukraine. This is the future that we want for our grandchildren, and so on. And in this respect, a story came to my mind. It was actually an interview with a 60-year-old Ukrainian man from Mariupol who one day, when Mariupol was already under siege, decided that it was time for him to leave the city with his little dog to go to Kiev because that's where his parents lived. So he grabbed the dog. They walked 200 kilometers to the nearest Ukrainian city that was under Ukrainian control, which is Zaporizhia. And when they got to safety, he was sitting there and telling stories that, whenever bombing started in Mariupol, early in the morning, they would all get up, he and his neighbors, people around, and start getting ready. But not just getting dressed, but getting dressed up. And he explained this, that, well, if the missile falls here, we all die, at least we're gonna look good and we won't be naked. So this, I think, serves as a good metaphor for Ukraine, right? So if we go back to the way the situation was in the country, we would die, not necessarily look good, but it would certainly not lead to anything positive in the long-term perspective, because we will still be vulnerable. So what kind of new Ukraine we should be talking about? To me, this new Ukraine is a country that's free from corruption, because this is usually the thing that Ukraine is known for. Certainly not the only corrupt country in the world, but for some reason, this aspect, justifies, I guess, the invasion of Ukraine to some extent, which I will never be able to understand. Next, it's country of rule of law, because this is something that we're lacking, and we all understand that this is the basis for economic development. And we can't, move forward without this and hope just by joining EU, for example, we'll suddenly have rule of law the next day. And another thing is economic freedom, because Ukraine is the least economically free country in Europe, and it's also among the most economically unfree countries in the world. Below Russia, below Belarus, but a lot of it is due to what I already mentioned, and this is rule of law. So these are the things that we need to change in order to avoid going to status quo, which never kept us happy with the situation. And sure, changes that lead to this are extremely painful, and we see that judging by the example of Estonia. We will have a couple of very difficult years, ahead of us before we can finally, reap the rewards of all of these changes. But we need to be a country that frees space and opportunity for people to work, make money, develop, and innovate. I don't know about being the freest country in the world or in Europe, but certainly we should be up there somewhere.
Let's aim high. I'd like to ask Oksana, one of the things I presume you don't want to return to is just the custom system as it has been for so long, and I've had some experience 8 times across the border with customs and paperwork and forms and 5.5 hours waiting with humanitarian goods. And I know that your institute is a really important initiative on this. Tell us how to bring about a new approach to trade policy for Ukraine.
First of all, I would like to say that Ukraine and Ukrainians now have, despite of this dramatical situation, we have a very big chances to change all our life, because this war has changed our life in personal sense and has changed the life of overall country. And now Ukraine has a unique chance to be a new country, to start with a white paper, white list with a blank, what we would like to build. And now I hear some people asked me what help need Ukraine in order to provide reform, in order to build new institution. I would like to say that we have some kind of threshold, February 24. Any assessment, any evaluation of Ukrainian business climate, which we have before, now doesn't work. So we will have a new country. And this chance is really unique because we can build whatever we want. And it is important to follow this principle which Natalia said, the role of law, freedom, etc. It's very important. But we have several challenges. First of all, the situation is more or less that we have in after the destroying of the Soviet Union. So we also built institution, have some lack of the data, some lack of the experience of reformators. But now we have a new challenge. First of all, this is unprecedented destruction of the infrastructure. This is a block of Ukrainian export facilities. This is unpredictable moving of the people, internally migration outside of the country. And in this case, we need some kind of new solution. It will be only own Ukrainian experience. And I think we should go this way together with other world. And what I would like to add, that Ukrainians is still optimistic. Several minutes ago, I received the result of our business survey. Yesterday, we completed this is survey of 3,500 Ukrainian enterprises. And what is, according to me, surprised that 40% of our respondents said that in the next 1 or 2 months they expect that situation in their company will remain without change, so not increase, not decrease. And 25 of our respondents said, okay, in 2 months perspective, we're expecting to growing. So I think it's very optimistic because in one hand the war is continue, in the other hand the life is also continuous, and rebuilding and recovering of the country must start immediately.
If the future is an entrepreneurial future, a future of private business and initiative, I'd like to ask Maria. I know that your center has been doing work on economic freedom as a policy response to the war. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for this question, because this was really interesting for us. During all wars, the academic literature says that it's usually the role of government which is increasing, not the opposite. In Ukraine, we have a very interesting mix, the soup of different liberal and illiberal policies. So this mix brings us very interesting results, and probably this is for those of you who study economic freedom and the impact of economic policies. This might be interesting for a topic for the future research. So two sides of the governmental policy. The first, liberal policies. Our government and our parliament decided that they allow all enterprises, all companies, whatever big or small, to transfer to the simplified taxation system. It means that the company can pay 2% turnover tax, and this is it. Some labor taxes, of course, the usual social contribution, like for the pension fund, but it's just the turnover tax, 2% flat. They were very fast to lift all the audits by the tax service, so no audits are allowed now in Ukraine, and the companies are actually free to do whatever they like. They can even not provide the government with their papers. They have a waiver on providing the papers to the government on the reports. What else? There are no licenses except for several activities. The grid connection is now also very simplified, extremely simplified. All the customs duties on all goods imported to Ukraine from every country except for Russia, Belarus, and the territories which are currently under temporary occupations were lifted. So you can actually import all goods freely, and even without the import VAT tax if you are a company working under this simplified taxation system. So this looks to me as an unprecedented liberalization and tax relief, just unprecedented thing. It has its price, and this is very important for us. In April, Ukrainian government was able to cover only a little bit above 30% of its expenditures with taxes. The rest was covered with grants, with credits, with money printing by the National Bank of Ukraine. This is a very big price because we will pay it as the debt burden, we will pay it as the inflation rising because of money printing. But this is what it is, and this is why I just would like to use this opportunity to encourage you to address your governments, your contacts in parliaments, to urge them to provide more grants than loans to Ukraine if it's possible. So there are many mechanisms which could be used. Please do this, and we also have some open letters from the civil society. I don't know if you send me the letter or the message, I will give you these letters for the distribution, so we can help the country this way.
The transformations of this sort that have been discussed require public commitment, and it means public understanding. So Alina, Ekonomichna Pravda has a lot of programs to explain these issues to the Ukrainian public, to put them in clear language. Can you tell us about how to create the public awareness for a transformation?
Yes. Now, Ekonomichna Pravda has 3 key points which we are working on. The first is personal finances. We talk people on how they can work with their finances, because on the first days of war, in the morning of 24th of February, there were very crowded on the streets because people were near bankomats. They thought that they have no opportunity to take their money, but it's almost 3 months of war and everything is working, and we try to explain how it works, why it works, and tell our readers about it. The second point is sanctions to Russia. It's a category of good news for Ukrainians. When they want to read some good news, they read which countries have left Russian Federation. And the third one is what will be in future, how we can rebuild our country, which plans we have. Of course, it depends on how and when the war will end, but we believe in better way and try to explain that people who leave should come back and rebuild our country.
Let me ask a question then about how to make changes permanent. So one that was, again, evident at the border, the elimination of the tax on the car importation, which was this crazy tax that made it very expensive for Ukrainians to obtain automobiles. The Russian army has destroyed, I think, approximately 500,000 cars. People need cars, but it was expensive, and this tax has, for the duration of the war, been eliminated. How can you get that as a permanent change in what was an irrational, punitive tax structure before? Any thoughts on that? Maria?
Yeah, I can take this one. This policy was not actually very well thought at the very beginning, because it was very important to keep the border open for the humanitarian goods, for the cars that are needed for Ukrainian army, for just so many logistical needs which are urgent, which are very important. And then the government opening and lifting this tax for the private buyers, it opened actually the box of Pandora, because everyone who wanted to buy a cheap car in Europe, they just went to Europe and bought these cheap cars, and it created the enormous lines, in the border. So every reform, if you are doing something good, it should be prepared, It always will have some externalities, and you should think about these externalities in advance, so that this reform is not hated, in the society and everywhere. You should think about the externality and how to eliminate it.
Natalia, were you, and Oksana?
Well, we will have a very big fight ahead of us in order to keep some of the things that Maria mentioned when she talked about liberal changes, right? Because these are not reforms. These are very, very temporary measures that were introduced during wartime, right, as relief. That was the main goal of them. And a lot of these changes are already being discussed to remove, right? Even though we are still at war, we don't know where the war will end. So, and I think this aspect of them being temporary, but no one knows how temporary, kind of overshadows the whole idea of, like, if some of these liberal changes we do want to see in the future, much better thought through, for sure, because, everything was done in a hasty manner. But no one is talking about that right now because of this, panic, but so what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen the day after tomorrow? And that's one of the reasons why this import tax, the canceling of import tax for cars, worked out the way it did, because when you don't have a deadline for this change of rules, people rush in to take advantage of it as fast as possible. And so basically doing it at the same time. And already surrounding this matter, we see conversations that, people are making money off of war because they want to basically to do it as a business, right? Importing very cheap cars and then selling them in Ukraine. So the rumor was that they are importing super luxury cars. And, you have these all of Mercedes and BMWs and Audis blocking military vehicles coming in, And then when we finally got the numbers, we saw that out of approximately, almost 30,000 cars that were imported, basically just about 40 were really, really very expensive. And like maybe 150 or 170 more were, just a level lower. And we do know who is starting these conversations. These are the people who want to get rid of this liberalization by basically burying it forever, because they will be able to say, well, we tried this experiment, it didn't work, and let's never go back to it again. So we are doing a balancing act in the country right now, because we need to somehow defend some of these liberalizations while also explaining why they are not working in the correct manner, so that we protect our future. Because if people think that that doesn't work, like with privatization in the 90s, right? Everyone was so unhappy with how it went because it was not transparent, right? It was not done properly, that for a really long time, the word privatization was basically like something that should not be mentioned, right? Because people will get really, really upset. Making them stick is very difficult right now because of these reasons, and there are unintended consequences, and the price is high, there are difficulties, but also I think we should look very closely at how our customs works, because we are shifting a lot of blame for the situation at the border on people importing cars, or even the humanitarian aid, right? That's why we have such long lines. But our customs is not doing a really good job of handling the situation. But it just proves the point. It needs to be reformed. It needs to be changed so that we do not deal with these issues in the future.
I think the situation much more complicated than only customs or another controlling agency work. I think now we should talk about overall culture in a society, because in one moment, as I told, we have unique situation to change, but in 1 minute the people will not change. And we are different, it's true. Here you can see, for example, in the entrance, in the central entrance of this hotel, you can see several cheap, very expensive cars with Kiev and Dnipro numbers. At the same time, you can go to any refugee center or in bus station, and you will see the Ukrainian refugees which sit down in grass, waiting for the next bus. So we are different, and we have a different behavior before war and now also. And of course, regarding this initiative, decreasing of import tax, it is in order to buy equipment for the Ukrainian army and volunteers. It's a good idea, but another people use this idea in order to make money on the war. Good things or bad things, we cannot, at the first glance, yes, they make money in the war. But from the another point of view, this is, in principle, this tax was high and should be eliminated in order to people fix this very simple problem. Take a car in order to doing business or transportation within the country. It's very simple and basic needs. So I think in this situation we need to. It's a longer way. We will not change the people at the moment, but we should understand that this is the need to looking for the balance and need to change in the mind of the people.
But don't you think that all those people who left Ukraine, it's like cleaning up? They will not come back, and the level of the corruption will be less.
No.
No.
Maybe I'm optimistic.
Just a quick remark on the proper way of sequencing the liberalization, like it was with the cars. In the very beginning of the war, the National Bank of Ukraine virtually prohibited the cash withdrawal from the cash machines, just to avoid the run on banks, to avoid the collapse of the banking system. Now it is allowed, but we didn't have any run on banks. We didn't have people rushing like they were rushing to buy the cars in Europe. Yes, there are no lines in the cash machines because of the proper sequencing. Because first thing the National Bank did, it ensured that the banks have enough liquidity. The second, it ensured that non-cash transactions are running good and properly, and you can pay with a card or with your telephone in every shop and the supermarket in a town or in a village or whatever. So people don't have a need, and people have confidence in the future. That's what Natalia said. It's very important that they have a confidence that they will be able to go and withdraw cash tomorrow. So that's why it worked. It worked good. And any liberalization should have this sequencing, you know, just to be successful and to be long-standing.
And I think I would like to add that people need to confidence, and people need to know a perspective. For example, of course, it's not easy in this situation, but taking into account the government policy, for example, how long it will be this decreasing of the tax, because almost all Ukrainian business who didn't work with VAT, in principle, pay only 2% tax. It's very, in principle, it's nothing, but it's unclear how long it will take. And in order to build a future, in order to make a plan, because how to develop the business, what will be with this personnel, with the working force, because it's another separate issue. Who will work? Will be returned people who now are abroad of Ukraine, etc. Business need to know how long it will take this tax regime, for example, and it is important make a clear perspective for people and for businesses.
And I do have a big problem with a statement that says making money off of war, right? So I think 2 or 3 weeks in this latest invasion, our representatives of the government and local governments, they started talking about the need to go back to work, right? Because we can't just all freeze and worry or volunteer, and the economy is in shambles, right? So this need for people to go back to work and make money, right, so that they can spend money, this is just part of life. And if we say that life continues, business activity continues. So the fact about, regarding cars being imported, it was not only done, to get cars to the territorial defense or to the front lines. The volunteers needed cars, right, to move supplies around. A lot of cars, a lot of vans, so that you understand, they pack this car, they send it to the front line, it might never come back, because basically they became expendable. They used to be a luxury, or, not everyone could afford them, but right now they are life-saving tools as well. You send vehicles to help evacuate people. Individual cars turned into life-saving tools, because in a lot of occupied areas, this is the only way how you can get out. So you either walk, like that guy that walked 200 kilometers, not everyone is capable of doing that, or you get into your vehicle or your neighbor's vehicle, you pack in 10 or 12 people, and you get the hell out, and you hope that you will make the trip. And not many cars survived. We're not talking about life losses here. So we don't know when, not only just when these changes will stop, being enacted, we do not know when the war will end and how many more cars we will need in the future, right? Those people staying in Ukraine right now, all of them are risking their lives. Not all of them have cars to be able to get out if the situation gets worse. So, who are we to say right now how many of those 30,000 vehicles will be later used as a way, as a means to save lives of your family, of people who need to be evacuated, of your neighbors, etc. So this is not our job, and this is not the priority for us to be handling right now. But we need to make sure that these liberalizing changes that are being introduced, that they are done properly so that later we don't have to reap the rewards of it not being done the right way.
Let me switch to another question. I would add, by the way, I saw so many cars with Yeti children riddled with machine gun bullets. It's unconscionable to see this. Very clear. Children in Russian, and they are completely destroyed by machine gun fire. But we talked a little bit about privatization. The OECD 1 year ago released a report on Ukraine, and one of the striking features was the poor state of privatization over the post-Soviet period. They counted more than 3,300 state-owned economic enterprises at various levels and across various sectors. Given the bad name that privatization acquired because of its history, how do you go about moving these loss-making enterprises, almost universally, into the value-creating sector? What's the magic to make that happen?
Again, probably short comment. The March was super hard for Ukrainian government, and the state-owned enterprises paid dividends actually to Ukrainian budget. This was the only thing that saved the budget, because international aid, either loans or grants, it was not incoming that time. It was like very beginning, yes. It was the first months into the war, and only in April we have the flow coming. So the state-owned enterprises was the ones who saved the Ukrainian budget from total collapse. They paid something, I think, over like 22 or 32 billion hryvnias, if I correctly remember the figure. Also, what Ukrdaliznytsia did with evacuating all the people, it was free of charge. You know, from any part of the country, you can jump on the train. Yes, you may have to sit on the floor, you may have to sit on the seat with several more people, like it was very crowded, but it was throughout the country. And these trains ran under the fire. The guys were injured, but they worked, and they didn't stop working even in, like, I don't know, I can probably, that's difficult for me to talk about that. But okay, whatever, what I'm going to say is that just usual perception of the state-owned enterprises as a big black holes. In Ukraine, it changed, I think. And not only because of the financial situation, but also because the companies that are state-owned and state-run, they were really heroes. So this is now it becomes important for us. Of course, privately owned companies also did a great, brilliant job. For example, the Kyivstar, yeah, you have a mobile connection in every region of Ukraine, the internet providers, and many others. But state-owned companies also did a good job.
No, I think that when we're talking, we should divide it the big company or big strategic company, which should stay in state ownership. At the same time, we have a small, unused state-owned facility, which in past was a factories or plant, and now they, even before war, they destroyed and looks ugly. And these facilities should be privatized after the war. It definitely, because if they were privatized before, hopefully in that place we have another production facility, and maybe which improved economic situation in the country, and we were not in such bad situation. So such kind of unprivatized facilities, so in Ukraine we call this a small privatization. I think it should be continue after the finished military aggression.
Let me pose then a general question in our last minutes about how to deal with the danger of foreigners coming in with a lot of money, often taxpayer money, and saying, we're going to rebuild you. There's a fabulous book by a great economist called Development with Dignity. I just read it, Matt Warner and Tom Palmer. And the thesis is that the successful ones originate from inside, and that when people create it, they own it, as opposed to just getting memos from the World Bank and a check. How do you resist that foreign-driven economic agenda and create a Ukrainian economic agenda?
I think first of all, it's an issue that the Ukrainian needs to create the economic agenda, needs to discuss with society in order to create this own plans using a different international experience, because several days ago we have some interesting communication when people said me, okay, we will help you to build using the experience, for example, of Georgia or Moldova. Now in Ukraine, this experience it's not applicable, because we have a quite different situation, and no other country which experience of making reform or will be applicable now in Ukraine. This is not a former Yugoslavia country, this is not Iraq, so it's our new experience. But of course, it should be according to this basic rule, freedom and rule of law. And for this issue, we need to cooperate with foreign community in order to people who would like to invest foreign money in Ukraine trust to our business climate, trust to us.
I feel really awkward answering this question with people like Ivan Miklos and Leszek Balcerovich present in the audience. But the thing about the situation in Ukraine right now is that we have to be honest, we are going to need a lot of money. And basically we are going to need a lot of money coming into the country for a really long time. And this is a rather scary perspective because, since we haven't resolved some of our internal issues yet, this creates a huge threat to the whole notion of building a more freer, prosperous Ukraine. I am the believer in the conditionality of such help. So, we should avoid the situation in which billions of dollars are just thrown into the country, because we had a war with Russia, because of humongous infrastructural destruction in the country, because of how many, lives we have lost. Because then there will be no guarantee that this money will be spent properly, that this money will be spent on to cover the shortages that we are going to have. So, but if it stays conditional, like you need to do this if you want to get the money, this is something that we will have to teach our political establishment, because there are already talks about, first we join the EU and then all of the necessary changes later. So it needs, there needs to be quite extensive explanation before, so that does not work like that. So first we win the war, then we do some things, and then we will be welcoming a lot of money into the country.
We've got 45 seconds. I'd like to close up with Alina and the work that you're doing on personal finance and helping people to think economically about their own finances. Tell us more. Do you see that as a part of creating a public opinion for a successful market economy?
I think yes. People now in Ukraine, in my optimistic mind, as you understand, have changed, and they will make these reforms, and they try to understand how to implement them. And all of my acquaintances want to join this and help Ukraine to rebuild itself and create some supervisor boards which will be not interested in those money, but they will control those money will go to that needs that should be covered.
Very good. Well, I hope you'll join me in two things. One, wishing Ukraine success in achieving liberty, peace and liberty, and also thanking our panelists for their contributions. Thank you very much.